Hey guys, Mr. V over here doing a book review today for The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is The Lord of the Rings, Book 1. Before I get into my book review, I want you to know that I try to do a spoiler-free book review. So if you see me looking down occasionally, I just have notes so I don't give any spoilers away. So, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. The main premise of this book is Sauron, the Dark Lord, has gathered to him all of the rings of power, the means by which he intends to rule Middle-earth. But he lacks one ring, which has fallen into the hands of the hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. Young Frodo Baggins finds himself faced with an immense task as his elderly cousin Bilbo entrusts the ring to his care. Frodo must leave his home and make the journey across Middle-earth to destroy the ring and stop the Dark Lord's evil plan. So, that's the main premise for The Fellowship of the Ring. And you can say probably almost, I'm assuming, the whole Lord of the Rings series. Before I get into my official review for this book, I want you to know that I read The Hobbit before reading this book, and I highly suggest that you read The Hobbit. While you don't need to read The Hobbit because they basically give you the summary of The Hobbit in the prologue, I highly suggest you read it just because you get a sense of the writing style, the characters, the scenery, and you do learn a lot more. You already know who Bilbo is, you already know the rings, you already know some of the situations. You learn a lot more in the book, but you do know a lot more, and I think that you will enjoy it more. But if you don't, he still does it in the prologue. Now, as for Fellowship of the Ring. Fellowship of the Ring, I thought it was a very fun fantasy book. It was a lot of fun. Now, it did have a slower beginning. As you could tell, he is setting one massive quest. You could tell it's just going to be a massive one, as the book is a 3-part series. So you could tell he's setting up for a massive quest. But just because it's a slower beginning does not make it boring. I don't want you to go in thinking, oh, this is going to be a boring beginning, because it's not boring at all. As there's actually very interesting. There's a lot of fun little things that he's doing in between. It just is slower because, as I said, he's setting it up for the whole quest so that as it goes, you just keep going. But there is a lot of fun in it because there's a lot of mystery surrounding the quest. First of all, like, okay, what are they going to do the quest for? You heard part of it in the description of the book, but they go a lot more in depth in the book, and you wonder, okay, what's going to happen? How are they going to do it? You know, there's like just continual wonder, okay, how are they going to escape these certain areas? What will happen if they run into this or that? And there's just a lot of questions, and the book poses the questions in the book when there's dialogue between the characters, but you even wonder some on your own. So that's why there's a lot of mystery surrounding the quest, because it takes a while to get going. And there's also a lot of just fun situations, or you could say like minor side quests in between. You know, he's pretty smooth on how he just keeps going along in the book, but there'll be just like a slight turn because something happens, and then you have to figure out that situation or that, and there's a lot of those fun type of quests, and how are they going to get across certain areas? So there are still a lot of fun things happening in between, because you do know the main point is they need to get to Mordor to destroy the ring. But it's not just one easy journey. So, there is a lot of fun things with that, because it's also like some of it's somewhat relaxed, but there's other parts that are pretty intense, which also is a lot of fun. Both are fun. You do want the relaxed scene because he does great dialogue, which I'll get into later, but it will go from like a relaxed scene, then something will happen, and then it'll become really intense, which is a lot of fun. That he can just like flip it, and like it comes back as a surprise at points, and it's a lot of fun. So I thought that was very fun with the journey, everything so far in this book. And you have to remember that this is a fantasy that was written in the 1950s. So it's somewhat of a simpler fantasy. I'm not going to say simple, but it's a somewhat simpler fantasy. The reason I say this is I saw some of the negative reviews online. Don't forget, again, this was written in the 1950s, but I actually enjoyed it being like a simpler fantasy, because you don't need like super crazy stuff of some of the modern day fantasy, but you don't need it to be super crazy. But yet this still had many of the typical fantasy things. It still had the things like wizards and elves and dwarves and all different types of creatures, and you see hobbits and the different sceneries and like what is going on in the sceneries, and there's just so many things. It's not just because it's simple that's like a knock against it. Some people knocked it down for that. Like, I just want you to know going in, just don't expect like it to be a crazy modern day one. but I still think that it had enough that you don't want it to be overdone. Now, some of the things, though, that I did not like about the book is that I felt that he had very long chapters, and that he could have shortened the chapters. Some of the chapters were very, very long, and after you started a chapter, you wanted to finish it. There were times that I did have to take a break mid-chapter because I just had to do other things in life. But I think he could have shortened the chapters. That was one thing I didn't like. Another thing I didn't like was there were many characters. There's a lot of characters to where it felt overwhelming. The main characters alone, there's over 15 main characters. I had to print a list out from online just so I remembered who was who. And it was overwhelming because he kind of just like drops almost everything at once. Or he'll drop like 5 characters at once. And that's why it can be overwhelming at times because you're trying to remember who is who. And yeah, he does go in depth again about it. But it is a bit overwhelming when you see all these different names and who is who and what is their power, who are they, and it can be a little overwhelming at times. And that's just the main characters, because there's also side characters, and that's why it can be tough. But there again, that's why you can tell he's setting up for a big quest, because after about the halfway point of the book, you kind of know who all the characters are. So, you know all the main characters to where it isn't as difficult. So now going into the future, to the book 2, you will know everything. But it is a little overwhelming in book 1. Just be prepared for that. Now, the biggest thing I would say, my biggest downfall for the book, though, was that some parts were a little confusing. And because there was sometimes a lot going on at different points in the book where there would be some parts were confusing because there would be many characters, places, references to legends, rivalries, and it would be all these references going on, and it would be a bit confusing at times. And there's one chapter in particular that was very confusing to me. I thought it was very confusing, and I wasn't the only one. I looked it up online. Other people thought the same thing about that chapter. But, it wasn't like it was a bad chapter, but just there were some parts that was confusing, so that can be tough in the book. Now, as for his writing style, I thought that he did a great job writing this, because he has an engaging style of writing that you want to keep reading, and that, even though there were long chapters, you wanted to keep reading. And I think it was because he had great dialogue between the characters, and the great dialogue definitely helps. And it was just when he was writing it, it made it feel like you were in Middle-earth. In that, the way they would speak differently, the type I said, the dialogue was great, the language, but he sets the scenery well. He gives you the legends and gives you the rivalries, gives you the history. While it can be confusing at times, sometimes when he slows it down a bit, you feel like you are really in Middle-earth. And it is pretty crazy, and it is a fun and engaging read in that way. Now, as for the end, I thought the end was a lot of fun. As you know, this is 3 books. This is going to be 3 books. This is going to be a trilogy. So you know that they're going to continue. You know the story's going to continue. So I was wondering, how are they going to end it? And he ended it on somewhat of a semi-cliffhanger. That's about as far as I can say. But I actually really enjoyed the end. I thought he did a great job with the end, because I had a lot of fun with the end. So, and it's one of those things that makes you want to continue. It makes me want to continue to book 2. But, overall, I thought Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, Book 1 was just, it was a simple fantasy, but it was a lot of fun. And, that it just had many fun stories in between. And you can see he's setting it up for one big, humongous quest, which will be a lot of fun. Now, I'm going to give it my official rating. So I always rate my books on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book, a 5 is average, and a 10 is phenomenal. If it gets anywhere near 10, you should put that on your reading list, because a 5 is average, and I'm known to be a tough critic, so it's hard to move up even 1 point in my rating system. So 4, The Fellowship of the Ring. I'm going to rate this book 7 out of 10, which is pretty solid in my rating system, and that's why I recommend you guys go and get this book. But I'd rate it a 7. The only thing that brought it down at times was it did feel overwhelming at times, and there were some parts that were a little confusing, but overall, I thought that this was a lot of fun, and this was a great fantasy, and this is basically almost a great start to the series, and it's going to make me want to go on to read book 2 now. If you guys have any comments, questions, anything like that, please post it in the comment section below. Hope you guys click the subscribe button, as I always upload multiple different types of book reviews. But thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.